KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Moriarty. And Dagan, you better secure that shit. How are you today, my friend?
Look into my eye.
They're a better character in the movie. No, we'll get to that soon. But how are you, my friend? How's everything?
Happy New Year.
You too. Yeah, Happy New Year. It's 2022.
This is God. It's been. I was just talking to Graydon when we were walking to the bus stop this morning. I said I haven't recorded in a month. It's been a month.
Yep.
Right.
We are coming back from the new year. It's, of course, KnockBack is kind of a non-linear podcast, so you can listen to them in any order. But for us, we haven't recorded in 4 or 5 weeks because we set up a bunch of episodes to go live, so we can take a little break from everything. Although I didn't get a break, and I don't think Dagan did either from his work. But
just from KnockBack.
Yeah, just from KnockBack. Yeah, exactly. But we're back and we're recording again. And I have to say, it's true, because we're doing Aliens today, the 1986 film, and when I started taking notes, I watched it last night. I was like, wow, I haven't taken notes for a KnockBack episode in a long time. And then I was getting the document together with all the inquiries from Patreon. Of course, we're supported on patreon.com/laststandmedia. And I was like, wow, I haven't done this in a while. And we had a vibrant thread for Aliens here. So we're going to get into it shortly. But before we do, I haven't really talked to you. How was your holiday, and how are you feeling? How's 2022 treating you thusly?
Yeah, I know. It's been 4 or 5 weeks. We got this brief KnockBack hiatus. I was going to get the if I could get the highlight reel from you, the vacation break. Well, we'll call it a vacation. We'll call it a hiatus break highlights. Yeah, it was good, man. It was kind of a blur. You know, I spent a lot of time with family. That was a great upside. Santa came, of course. I haven't talked to you. It occurred to me, I haven't even spoken to you vis-a-vis KnockBack since before my birthday. So it was really early December. It was funny. You know what I have to talk to you about? Because this literally happened the day after we broke. I think the day after we recorded and then said, I'll see you in January for the next KnockBack episode in the new year. This funny thing happened because you and I talk about sanitation workers, talk about the garbage men on the show from time to time. And one time or 2 times we got into the conversation of how do you tip these guys? What's the protocol? Seems to be different depending on what region you live in, at least in the US. And the day after I broke with you, I got a thing from my garbage man. I got a card, basically like a little postcard in a little baggie with pebbles to weigh it down on top of the trash can after he came, basically soliciting tips, basically saying, hi, my name's Lewis. I live here. Like, here's my address. If you want, you could leave me a tip or you could send it to my address. He had an address in New Jersey. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening, and I can't talk about it for a whole another month.
Yeah, that's too bad. You had to hold that in. So you
adds a whole nother dimension now to the conversation.
Absolutely. So how did you react?
Well, I tipped the guys, but here was my predicament: was that they changed my garbage day. Our garbage, like our sanitation place, is like in the middle of the state, so 2 or 3 hours away. They opened up a huge depot down the street. So I guess that for ease of, just for ease of service, it's going to be a lot better, a lot more streamlined or whatever you would think. But they also changed my garbage day. Now, with changing my garbage day, I'm sure my sanitation workers are going to change. So I basically had to tip out twice or 4 times, right? You got the recycle guy, regular trash, twice now, because I couldn't not give the guys that I had previously a tip. Then I had to tip the new guys coming in. Got to send the message like, it's a very self, it's a very selfish thing, right? You put the money out basically saying in not so many words, please take whatever I put out here. And remember this.
Remember. Yeah, exactly.
Remember this, right?
It's a compact.
So that was my little pickle that I had to do. Yeah. We had to tip 4 times over, but I don't know why. Of all the things that happened over the break, it was that one thing that I was like most regretting not being able to talk to you about. But everything else was good. Just chilling. Had to work a little bit.
Yeah.
Work at the day job a little bit, which is fine. They gave us the option. I didn't want to leave the money on the table.
Sure. Yeah. Why? Hustle, my friend.
What about you, man? What's been going on since early December?
Not much. No. I don't know, man. A lot's been going on. People might notice. I mean, you might have noticed already on Sacred Symbols. I don't know what order these will go in, but I got like custom shelves built in here. They're over where I can't point there. So you can't really even see them, but they're for my Joes. They actually light up, and so that will be filled, in the coming months. I don't think I have any time to do it now, but got the hallway painted. Got a custom shelf built in like across an entire wall for my books. And we're getting another shelf built here, and this will all get painted eventually soon. So you'll see some things going in and out of here. We're playing around with light, as you can see here, to see what's up, so I don't look like, as Micah called it, that I look like I'm in a Taliban cave anymore.
I noticed you got a little more. It's a little.
Yeah,
brighter.
I liked that aesthetic personally. I like low light, but yeah, it wasn't something that I don't think Dustin and Micah really appreciate. So. Yeah, but otherwise, I'll tell you, man, like I'm pretty shot. I gotta be like I'm kind of sad vacation's over. Although I like getting into it. I was talking to someone. I'm doing some consulting for a company in Israel, and I was talking to them, and I was like, they're like, "How was your vacation?" And I'm like, I kind of hate vacations because they get in the way of business. But so I was kind of eager to get back into things, but I spent 2+ weeks writing for the new games, and I'm just totally creatively spent. I know some people can write every day and like get everything out, but I can't do that. Like I'm totally spent right now because I think about it for so long and then I get it out. So what I did was we're going to announce it soon, but we remade our very first game, and we're going to show that off soon. It's a full ground up remake, and that game never had a story. I wrote an entire story for it. So I spent a little time with that, but then I spent most of my time with the RPG we're making, and I basically have finally written it. And I wrote a 20-something page treatment for it. We hired a writer to flesh it out. I will have final say and everything, and I'm going to get back involved with everything. But so it was a lot. It's actually the reason these pictures are here, if you guys can see them, is because that's an entire board full of spoilers for the new game, and I don't know where else to put
those boards, man.
So yeah, it's I sent Dagan a picture of it actually.
So cool.
I don't know, but we'll blur it out. I don't even know if it will come through. If it does, but
let me see.
I don't know if that.
I can see. I can see your little posties, your colorful rainbow-like posties.
I don't think
Post-it notes.
I'm pulling myself back here. I don't think. I don't think it even. Thankfully, I don't think it's even on the camera. That like the actual. I laid the game out in 3 acts, and it's just literally blah 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 with all of it. So if you saw a picture of it, you would just spoil the entire game. But I stole that idea from Amy Hennig, who of course wrote Uncharted. And when I did the history of Naughty Dog, I was in her office and she showed me the flowchart for Uncharted 4. She's like, "You won't tell anyone, right?" And I was like, "Of course." But the game wasn't announced yet. And she laid it out like this. It was on a huge wall in their office, and it was like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, or like Stage 1, Stage 2, whatever it was. And it was all their notes and stuff. And I was like, I always remembered that.
Did she have storyboards as well, or that was all like you? That was all writing.
It was all writing for her. I'm sure the artists and stuff had storyboards, but
yeah, eventually they get to that point,
right? So yeah, so that's kind of what I spent my vacation doing. It's a good problem to have, but I didn't really get a chance to turn myself off, which I'm kind of bummed about. I wanted to play more games. I wanted to relax more and stuff like that, but it's what the situation called for. I think being busy is a good thing. Being an entrepreneur, a busy entrepreneur doing things is good. So I'm not trying to complain, but certainly we're back.
But I hear you. It goes fast. Yeah, regardless, working or relaxing, the time goes quick.
It does. Like I think we bought something like 20 days of nothing, like no content creation. Yeah. And yeah, I was like, oh my God, I can't. I remember being in there and being like, oh, it's like 17 days left and 13 and 8, whatever. I'm like, oh my God.
The countdown.
And, but I'm glad to get that all, especially because I think I was holding up the production of our games, and that's not good. All right. Dagan, let's talk about Aliens. This was on your list. So you kind of pitched the next wave that we're going to do. Obviously, we're going to be dropping in items that you guys have voted on patreon.com/laststandmedia. A lot of games coming up. So Halo, Combat Evolved, Red Dead Redemption, Uncharted Drake's Fortune. I'm very curious to see what Dagan thinks of Uncharted, of course. I think you're going to love it.
Amazing. I can't wait.
So we have those things coming up, but in that list were a bunch of items that Dagan wanted to do as well, and Aliens was at the top of the list. And so here we are. And this is, of course, a James Cameron joint. And I'm curious what you think of this film. I think this film is really good and obviously seminal and important, but I also think walks away from what I think made Alien so interesting in some ways to me. And I was sitting down watching it. Did you watch the special edition?
Yes, I watched both actually for this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I only watched the special edition. I was like, I guess that's what we'll do.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I realized that I don't know that I've ever sat down and really fully watched this movie, at least as an adult. This was another one of those movies that I remember being on like HBO and shit, or Showtime or whatever.
Absolutely.
And I was like, what was interesting, and the reason I ask you about the special edition is I kick it over to you, Dag, is because I was watching this, especially with like the turret and some of the other stuff. And then I was reading about the special edition and they're like, oh, that shit wasn't in the original movie. And I'm like, but I saw that. Like, I remember that. And then what it was, I feel like I did. And then when I looked, and apparently these special edition cuts started appearing on TV in the late 80s. CBS apparently had the basically special edition in 1989. And then I guess maybe it appeared elsewhere. So I was like, maybe I'm not crazy, because at first I was like, oh, false memory. I remember this gun turret scene. But then I was reading that, no, none of the gun turrets were even in, or like none of the flashback stuff's in it, or like you have no idea why nude is relevant in the original, which I think is weird in the movie. So I'm a little confused about what I've seen when. But since you were of the prime age of 12 or 13 when this movie came out, perfect age for Alien and Aliens.
Absolutely.
I got to know, what was it like back then? Do you remember it? And of course, how do you feel about the film? I know people really love this film. This is some people's favorite sci-fi or horror film ever.
Yeah.
I personally find it a far cry from that for me, but I don't think it's anything less than great. I just don't know if I want James Cameron in this role. And I love James Cameron. I love Terminator, shit like that. And we'll do that at some point, I'm sure. I mean, Terminator is amazing. And of course, another awesome female lead in there. But
absolutely,
I wanted more of the Ridley Scott here, and that I feel is lost, largely, in my opinion. I don't know. So I've said a lot. Dave, how do you feel about Aliens? What do you remember about it back in the day? And do you think it holds up?
Yeah, you know what? I have to say, yeah, for me, still to this day, one of my favorite sci-fi joints, I think, of all time. And I think because I have such a historical connection to it, it did come out like right in my little kid crossing over into young teenager wheelhouse.
This is the movie you would go see, right? When you were like, oh, we got to go see Aliens. It's almost too adult for us, and we're gonna go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it had that effect. I wish that I had the druthers to see it in the movie theater as a 12-year-old kid, but I didn't even see it on the big screen initially. My first memory, and it's a very vivid memory for me, was seeing it over Aunt Carla and Uncle Michael's house on cable when I was 12. Dana must have been 10 or 11 and at the time, and we were sleeping over for the weekend. Me and Dana were sleeping over there for the weekend like we often did. I guess you and Allie, you were really young. You and Allie were probably back at home. We were just staying with Aunt Carla and Uncle Mike for the weekend, and it must have popped on HBO. And I remember, I think that Aunt Carla and Uncle Mike even went to bed, and me and Dana might have been on the pull-out couch in their living room. And we were watching it for the first time. And I remember very early on being stricken by the sensation of, okay, this feels a lot like my sort of the way resonated with Poltergeist and stuff like that, where I was on one hand horrified and disturbed by it, but kind of forced myself to watch it, was really smitten by it, and it had an allure, but also at the same time was really got its hooks in with the action aspects of it. At that time I was enjoying things like Rambo and Red Dawn, Commando, the first Terminator film, and like our obsession with G.I. Joe. So, the gunplay Army/Marine. Later on, we would get fascinated with that vis-a-vis the
good shit
Vietnam movies like Platoon. So it had that horror sci-fi thing where it had specifically the chest burster scenes. As a kid, like that would really freak me out. But I forced myself to watch it because I enjoyed it so much. And probably as a kid, probably watched it a dozen times. The funny thing with the special edition as compared to the theatrical version, Kyle, is that I had never seen the special edition. For some reason, up until 2 nights ago, I actually bought it on Amazon. Just figured, why? It's $5, just buy it,
Yeah, I noticed that. It was $4 to rent or $5 to buy, I noticed.
It's like, just buy it.
But I still rented it.
And did you really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so great.
I
debated.
don't know why. I have no idea why I did that.
I still debated because I like the original so much. I have to say, I still love the original because I just think that's the way I grew up with it and I'm used to it. You know, that's sort of how it works out for me.
Alien is,
And I just think the way it's beat for beat, the way it plays out, the way it unfurls, I really like the original theatrical version. But it was nice to finally see this extra stuff, in particular, some of the Ripley Newt stuff and the remote, computer controlled gun stuff, which was, I had no idea that stuff even existed. But again, I think it interrupted the flow of the film for me because I'm so addicted to the original. And I think that's the big thing is that sci-fi action horror thing. Not only did it have the horror that I was like drawn to, even though I was afraid of it, and the gunplay and the army type stuff with the Marines, the Colonial Marines, but also throw sci-fi into that mix, right? A kind of lived in, very Star Wars-esque flavor of sci-fi, outer space, spaceships. That's like the perfect cocktail for a 12-year-old in the 80s. I was super down. And it was nice that we got to set the table with Ridley Scott's Alien because that on its, gorgeous, say everything you want about Ridley Scott as a cinematographer, the way he frames a shot, his lighting, the atmosphere he creates. And I think James Cameron was trying to channel a lot of that for this movie. But I think what makes this movie so memorable too is that it is a departure from the first one. It is more of an action film. You do get more of that 80s action, Rambo-esque flavor. In fact, I never even knew James Cameron wrote First Blood Part 2. He wrote Rambo, even though he didn't direct it. So it has a lot of that sort of 80s flavor, I think timeless in a lot of ways. And I still love it. And I wanted to kick off the new year with a topic that was kind of near and dear. And I'm looking forward to getting into it. It's a fun movie. It's just a fun popcorn flick, I think, at its core. And I still enjoy watching it.
By the way, as we talk about turning over the new year again, this is our 5th calendar year because it's 2018, 2019, 2020.
How crazy is
2021, 2022 of doing the show, so a long time. Now, there's something about the 80s and changing things up, right? We've talked about this in video games. I don't know what's going on there, but Aliens in 1986, it just fits as being something that's different. Just like we talk about Mario 2 USA being different and Castlevania 2 being different. Sure. And just everything kind of being a little bit of a departure. And James Cameron, I find such an interesting person because he clearly doesn't. James Cameron isn't fucking around. When you look at James Cameron's filmography, it's not big at all.
No,
he just kind of hits and then disappears. And I actually like it, and I don't like. I respect it, but Corey Adams wrote in, and I looked this up because it's true. It just leaked. I don't know if you saw this, not leaked, but someone just wrote about it last week as we're recording. He says, "Hey, KnockBack brothers, it has been recently confirmed that James Cameron pitched Aliens to studio execs by writing Alien on a whiteboard and then a big S. Then he said, but here's what it's going to translate to, and then he drew a line through the S to make it a dollar sign. And he talked about that in an interview just last week. So it's totally true. Yeah. So he wrote Alien on the board and then wrote an S next to it and then wrote a dollar sign.
I never heard that.
And I feel like, yes, of course he did. Of course James Cameron did that.
Holy shit.
And that's awesome. And that's a big, big balls move. But I think the one, and I don't want to be too critical because I think the movie is really awesome. I especially like how you talked about in the aliens and combat. I think this movie is so iconic from so many different angles, but it's not a horror movie anymore, in my opinion. It's an action movie, and that's fine. But what made Alien special to me was the true tension of the horror. And Aliens doesn't connect on that level for me because we know already what the horror is. We know. I mean, we see new version, we see the Queen alien or whatever, but we know, right? Like we saw it all when the Nostromo or whatever visited this ship and this planet. But I have to say that for me, Sigourney Weaver just steals the show. I mean,
so good.
What an amazing actress and what an amazing character Ripley is. And Dig, I don't know if we did Dead Space in between doing Alien and Aliens, but I never really made the connection that the protagonist, Isaac Clarke in Dead Space, is an Ellen Ripley type character in that he's not a soldier. He's a person who's caught in this. He's an engineer who's caught in this situation. She is a pilot and like a machines operator caught in this situation. I wonder if that was more literal of a inspiration than I had anticipated or ever really thought I never really looked at those movies being too interconnected apart from just the theme of being alone in space and how scary that is. But I feel like what's lost with Aliens to me, and I'm curious what you think, is when you have too many people, you're talking to people back on Earth, you see humans, you're in safety, and then you go back, it just makes it seem like there's hope. And I think that what was fun about Alien is that it just felt hopeless. And I think James Cameron is to blame for that, in quotes. I mean, obviously this is an amazing movie, but it feels more like an action movie. I mean, would you have preferred more of a psychological horror with some violent elements, which is what I think the first one is? Or do you like the turn that they made here into full? I feel like this is almost like a Rambo movie.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And I just, again, I always kind of shit on action. I don't need it. You can almost just say again on brackets on black screen, like at gunfight. And I'll be like, okay, cool. But I like them leveraging the very cool iconography, Weyland-Yutani, the Space Marines, and these hulking ships and their great technology. It's awesome. The characters, Vasquez and all these characters are awesome. But Hicks, of course. But I don't want an action movie. I wanted a horror movie. And I think that in going into this and not really remembering too much of it, I remembered it being more horrifying than it was. And I think that was because I was just younger and I was scared of everything.
Yeah.
Because it was funny. Micah was kind of scared of the movie when she was watching it. Micah's scared of a lot of movies. So
she never saw it.
No. And I was surprised that I was even surprised. I was like, you're scared of this? Like this. So what do you think about that move from horror to action? Is it something you embrace, or is it something that you would have taken maybe another Ridley Scott approach?
I still love it.
It was like Dan O'Bannon or whatever.
Dan O'Bannon, sure.
Yeah, the guy that wrote the original. Would you have preferred a treatment more like that?
Yeah, I still, I loved it at the time, and I still find myself reveling in that. That's an interesting story about James Cameron. I never heard that before, although I could definitely see it. That's fascinating stuff. And the conversation does kind of start with him, because he is very good at towing the line between art and quality, and being a perfectionist and being a craftsman and being talented and profit. He's very good at that. He's also a master, apparently, which is a great point. I love starting the conversation this way, at sort of shrinking the margin between success and failure by not doing too much, thereby vastly reducing the potential risk of failure, right? Like when you look at his filmography. And it's nice to start the James Cameron conversation, I think, with this movie, although, of course, we're going to talk about Terminator 2, and then, of course, a huge part of the conversation, some of the biggest moneymakers of all time in Titanic, Avatar. Now he's got all these Avatar films slated for release, and that's a whole nother conversation. You and I.
I don't even know. I don't even know what's going on with that. It's 5 of them.
It's so crazy. Yeah. No, exactly. It's so.
I didn't know anyone. And we talked about when we did Avatar: The Last Airbender, the cartoon series, the anime style cartoon series. I was saying, like, I was so put off by James Cameron's Avatar that I started melding them together, and that's why I ignored The Last Airbender all those years.
Isn't that
I don't
so
know what
funny?
the hell's going. I don't even know what that show's or that movie's about.
I kind of did the same thing.
So,
and you know what's scary, Kyle?
Yeah.
As per Avatar 2009, I didn't even realize it was that long ago. As per KnockBack rules, we could talk about it soon.
I'd be happy to watch that movie. I mean, I feel like it is a cultural touchstone. Clearly, people love it, or they wouldn't be investing what must be over $1 billion in these. Look
movies. At the ride at the ride at Disney World opened 2 years ago, something like.
Oh yeah,
so
you've been there since. Did you go on it?
Still relevant, yeah, and it's very cool. It's a very cool sort of that whole channels that whole thing with VR and everything. It's really neat, but for me, Kyle, I think I love you drawing up the parallels of Super Mario 2 and Simon's Quest and things that were a departure, but still in their own right successful sequels, which I think this is. Not only in its box office draw and its monetary success, but just how much people loved it then and still love it today. I would even go out on a limb and say I might even like this movie more than the original Alien, although I celebrate the original Alien, like you, as a through and through horror flick, which it is. And this takes a whole different dimension. What I still like about it is I like that it goes outside the box a little bit and says, okay, we know what happened in the first one, set on a starship, very claustrophobic setting, non-military people, and apparently one alien and the devastation that this thing wreaks on this crew. Now, we ask the question, what happens when we go to a place with an unlimited number of these things against people with military training, against Marines? What's the outcome going to be like then? You know, just a horrifying prospect of seeing more than one of these things, let alone an army of these xenomorphs. I think the xenomorph for me, and if, you know, I'm the biggest scaredy cat, I'm the biggest coward in the world, right? But I think the xenomorph is still one of the scariest slasher aliens for me, you know, type creatures for me. You think along the lines of Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy Krueger and all these things, right? Mass murderer. I always thought of the xenomorph like kind of like a great white shark mixed with like a spider, the intelligence of a spider. It has the kind of tendencies of a wasp, a robotic killing machine. Maybe you channel a little bit of Freddy Krueger in there. But the thing about them is they're physically horrifying. They're massive. They have these killing tools, jaws and tendrils and armor and all this kind of stuff. They could plan, dude. They could strategize. They could problem solve, which we see later on in the series too. Like they know how to shut down the power in a facility. Like they're pretty fearsome things. I mean, they're a daunting enemy. You just think when you're watching this, like if they learn how to pick up a pulse rifle, we're fucked. Like if they learn how, what's stopping these things? These things
Right.
are obviously intelligent besides being physically formidable. So, but for me, that was enough to take Ridley Scott's original. I like that James Cameron was sort of respectful and reverent and sort of tried to carry over the cinematography, which we see, especially in the beginning of the film, the lighting and the framing, and really trying to cut together a thoughtful piece, but then mixing in those sort of B-movie action trope 80s elements and making it more fun and popcorny and just trying something different, which was sort of a risk. You know, sort of a risky proposition. I guess he felt already, even though he was only a few movies into his career, doing something like Terminator and feeling very connected to the action genre, that he could pull it off. And I think he did. And I even think it would have been interesting to see, of course, David Fincher does 3, and that's another departure. And this franchise is kind of known for departures up through Prometheus and Alien Covenant, which I still haven't seen, Alien Covenant. But you know, this seems like it seems like a franchise that lends itself to trying new things. In fact, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do next, now that they're talking about doing this proper sequel to Aliens with the Ripley, Newt, and Hicks characters. What, you know, are they going to kind of return to the well of one of those 2 initial formulas? Are they going to try something new? I'm not sure. You know,
it's cool because I'm kind of ignorant on Alien or Aliens like myth and like the Bible of aliens, like who the xenomorphs are and stuff. But is it that, because this was the thing I was confused about, because I love the scene in the beginning, towards the beginning, when Ripley is kind of defending herself. She's in cryo sleep for 57 years floating in space. Very cool. I love that kind of stuff.
Love that.
Very, very cool. And she's being tried for basically destroying shit for the corporation she works for and all of that. But she notes that they find an alien ship full of these species of egg or whatever, these eggs and these face huggers and all that. And she reiterates when one of the women's like confused or like saying, she's like, "Don't you understand? We found another species spaceship full of these things." So I'm a little confused. Are they not one and the same? And if so, doesn't that indicate that they are very intelligent? I mean, intelligent enough to be spacefaring, or is there another species that we don't know about? This is where I'm a little confused about what's going on.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I think it's important to know, Kyle, at the top. I'm glad you brought this up because I almost forgot. I did forget until you reminded me. We're kind of going on the conversation of seeing the first film and the second film. Interestingly, I think the second film does work almost as well without seeing the first film in a lot of ways, which is weird. Maybe just in terms of suspense and mystery and mystique. But in any event, you and I are going on the conversation of the first 2. We're not going to talk about 3 and 4. We're not going to talk about Prometheus. I still haven't seen Covenant, even though Covenant supposedly wraps things back around to Alien with the David android character and all that. I don't know a lot. I only know what I read. And the offshoot fiction, I know they did a comic book series exploring these characters, specifically, I think, Ripley, Hicks, and Newt. and other things like the video games. So we can't really incorporate all that into the conversation because I will speak for myself. I don't know it, even though I am kind of fascinated with it. I love the series enough to explore it, but I haven't yet. So that is a great question. I always think, and in the special edition, it shows the aliens ship, but I know what you're saying. I don't think, from my knowledge, right, and I could be wrong. You guys correct me if I'm mistaken. I don't think they're piloting the ship. I think these things are a weapon of something else.
So they're like
There's some sort of biological weapon, right? Which Weyland-Yutani wants to kind of utilize them in that regard. But I think there's something else's weapon, like a planet clearing. Like we're very interested in colonizing this planet. We're going to send our weapons down, take everything out, and then we go in. Right, because nothing, not even Colonial Marines,
and that's explored in the later movies. Because I saw Alien 3 a long time ago. I never saw Prometheus, I don't think, and then I definitely never saw Covenant. So,
and did you see 4? Aliens 4 was another.
I don't think I even knew that existed.
Who directed that one? I can't remember, but that's another kind of offshoot thing where they explore xenomorph heavy, but not really exploring the origins. Right. So that's a big part of the conversation. And who knows, maybe when we explore the later iterations of the franchise, we'll be able to speak to that better. But I know what you mean. So it's almost like you have to kind of just suspend your disbelief and just put off the origin, because there's this thing I think the xenomorphs are and these badass aliens are so riveting that I think automatically you think of like, what is the story here? And I think it's been so long since we got popular answers in pop culture beyond sort of the side fiction with the comics and stuff that people are, genuinely curious. I know I am. But yeah, for now, it's like watching Aliens is almost frustrating in a way, because if you don't know those things like myself, then you're just constantly asking like, all right, what's the story here? Are there more of these things? Where are they holed up? Like, what is their origin planet? Where do these things reside when they're not invading everywhere else? That sort of thing. How many queens are there? That sort of thing. So yeah, that's one thing where it's like, yeah, hopefully we get to explore that more. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that know the answers. But that's one thing for me, is that I enjoy this movie and this franchise enough to want those questions answered. I'm like, come on, give it to us, So if that does exist, I'll have to explore that for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating. I love space stories, as people know, and horror in space and all of that, because it can play with time in a way that is just not possible on Earth. That's why everything is just scarier in space. That's why Dead Space is just so scary. I used to describe it. It's like, just take Resident Evil, take the mansion, and then just plop it in space. It's just inherently, there's nowhere to go. It's inherently much scarier. There's always this little hope you can get out of the Umbrella Corporation facility and get back to civilization. But when you're in some interstellar space, there's nothing to be done. And that was kind of what was cool about Ripley's character, just going into stasis and just popping out with Jonesy, of course, and
good old Jones,
and going about her business. I must say though that understanding maybe now a little bit more of there's like a meta situation in Aliens, because Weyland-Yutani wants to manipulate the bioweapon that is someone else's bioweapon. So it's not like a natural thing. See, I never really considered that. Because I thought that in some way they were one and the same. I thought maybe it was like an Independence Day type thing where the creatures have some sort of sentient thing inside them, or some sentient species or something like that. But I like that Aliens plays with that. And I like that Ripley, again, reiterates that in the meeting, saying like, this is something, because it's scary. There's just a total third party. We have no idea who they even are. I mean, that's what's even more frightening. And what's even better is that they're like, oh, yeah, we have been there for 20 years. Oh, and then when we go there, it's clear that they were well aware of what was going on the surface of the planet, and or it was a moon, an exomoon, and right. Because, I mean, that's obvious, right? I mean, I'm interpreting that right because they have the facehugger samples, so they clearly know that Weyland-Yutani is lying during the trial, right?
I think so. Yes,
because they have the samples. They know they're lying even to the colonists at Hadley's Hope. I was surprised to hear that much of that footage from Hadley's Hope is not in the original movie. I don't even know how you frame the movie without. In the original movie, apparently, and I'm sure fans know this, but I didn't. You don't have any idea that Ripley's daughter exists or is dead.
No,
which,
they don't
which gives a Last of Us type. And I wonder if this is what Neil was inspired by. the proxy relationship doesn't really make any sense without that knowledge. You don't see anything with Hadley's Hope about how Newt ends up in the facility in the first place. So I don't know what the fuck you thought when you see this movie in 1986. Where the hell did this girl come from? And I almost felt like she was in some way like a MacGuffin. And James Ketchum wrote in, as well as Nuclear Prostate, two sides of the same coin. They say, James says, is there a better line in all of movies than Newt saying they mostly come out at night mostly? You can hear all the horrible things she's seen in the time she's been alone. It's terrifying. But Nuclear Prostate says on Patreon, hello, brothers in arms. Not so much a question, but a comment on the film from me. The only thing keeping this from masterpiece status like the first film is just how annoying Newt is. Every time she screams, I just want to plug my ears and scream myself.
Aww.
It's not that I don't agree with either of the, well, James isn't really saying Newt's a great character. And obviously that's an iconic line about they mostly come out at night, mostly. Is a great line, but it is kind of weird. Like, I wish she wasn't in the movie because I don't know exactly what it adds. And they didn't really feel like it was that important in the original cut to show the relationship that was the proxy for Newt and Ripley, which was Ripley's relationship with her daughter, who she outpaced in age, very Interstellar-like situation. And I look at it, I'm like, wouldn't this have been just more tense and more crazy if these people just went into a base, it was just totally abandoned and no one was alive, and then they have to get out by themselves? I feel like there's enough tension without adding another character. So but I had no problem with the performance. I thought she was actually pretty good. So what do you think about Newt?
Yeah, Carrie Henn, dude. It's so funny. Recently, like a couple of days ago, I heard her say that line, that they mostly come at night, mostly, which is, shout out to our sister Allie. She always says that. She always has that quote. She said that was the one line her friends tortured her with, like her entire life. So regrettable, and probably her only regrettable moment of the whole film or the whole experience was that line. So I always thought that was funny, because it is very funny the way she says it, the inflection and everything like that. It always stands out to me. And just interesting that she never did another film. She didn't go in for the movie business. She was one and done. But I always give her performance a lot of credit. I think I know what you're saying about the Ripley character. Knowing about that she was away for so long, for almost 60 years, and she kind of got blindsided and waylaid by this menace out in space. And as a result of that, never was able to return to her daughter, who died, I think they say she died of cancer or something at the age of 67 years old. And having said the whole thing with, I promise to return for her 11th birthday. And then the tragedy sort of evoking like an Interstellar type thing where all the time passes when you're out in space. And just a horrific idea of that as humans, of like being away for generations and watching your daughter die and become older than you and die of a sickness in her 60s and all that kind of stuff. And just also speaking to Ripley's character of her, not only her PTSD and her trauma, but her vengeance. She's got a score to settle with these fucking things. So I love having that in the story for that. But I didn't even need it for the Newt character. I understood the Newt character. You understand that Weyland-Yutani has these they're for whatever reason, humans are colonizing planets and moons and stuff. We don't really know why. At least I don't from these two films, but we know they're going down with these atmosphere processing units, this technology, and they're colonizing planets. They're colonizing other places besides Earth. So there's these scientists and these workers, blue-collar workers, and these colonials that are taking down and having their families and making their lives on these places. So as a result of that, there's going to be children. And I do like the idea. It feels very anime to me to have like this horrific place overrun by these demons, by these monsters, and the way this little kid survives by living in the air ducts and running and hiding, and just the sheer amount of horror and terror this kid must have endured. So I kind of like having that proxy down there where these Marines are daunted by this thing, but this little kid's managed to survive for God knows how long against this formidable scourge, right? So I always kind of like that. And I also kind of give a nod to her performance. It's not perfect in the film. It's a very little kid-like performance in a lot of ways, but you have to kind of channel it, especially for a sci-fi movie in the 80s, right? You got some guy off screen pulling like a rubber face hugger on a string, and you got this other jackass over here with a puppet. and you're trying to give this grounded performance. That's hard for a seasoned adult actor, let alone this little kid who's never done anything before.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So if you take all that stuff into consideration, you got to kind of tip your cap to Carrie Ann's character and into the Newt character. I think she does a serviceable job if you think about, and James Cameron knowing how, demanding he is and what a perfectionist he is and all of this. So I think for me, I always kind of dug it. I always kind of liked it. And, you do get enough of Newt just from what she says, from the exposition. She had a family. She had a mom and dad. She had a little brother. She's kind of holed up in that air duct with the blankets and the filthy stuffed animals and the crates of food that you see in the packaging and whatever kind of trinkets she was able to manage, jewelry and stuff. It's kind of cool. I really like the atmosphere of that. And I love imagining her, and they might have explored this in comics and stuff. I love imagining her story before Ripley and the Marines arrived. Like, what did she do in between her parents getting killed and her family and everybody else getting wiped out to being like the lone survivor of this colony, which was supposedly like a sprawling thing. Yeah, of like 13 different micro colonies or something.
Right. 60 to 70 families, they say, right?
Insane.
Terraforming, which is fun. So obviously a huge feature of one of the stories I wrote. And I love the idea of terraforming planets. I love how Elon Musk talks about it earnestly, like we're going to do it to Mars, which is so exciting. Although he wants to do it with nuclear. I don't know if you've ever read about his idea or one of them, which is to detonate a shit ton of nuclear bombs in like the Martian poles, and it will like melt all of the water at the poles and like,
oh wow, no, I never heard of this.
Flood the planet, I guess, in some way, and begin a process in which they can oxify, I guess, the atmosphere. But of course, that's way above my pay grade. But
is he the actual Weyland-Yutani of the real
yeah, exactly.
World? Hopefully not as evil.
Hopefully, yeah, exactly. Hopefully, SpaceX doesn't turn into an evil corporation.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because you brought up Weyland. Obviously, this is an iconic fake company. And Caleb Greer wrote into us about this on Patreon. He says, "Hey, Colin and Dagan, I wanted to ask you about Weyland-Yutani Corp. Bought out by Walmart just before Alien Resurrection in the lore. Is that true? If that's true, that's stupid as fuck.
I didn't know that.
Their goal is to capture and preserve an alien for study in bioweaponry, is what put our heroes in harm's way in basically every Alien property, including the game. And I find it fascinating that they're kind of the real villains over the Xenomorphs that just act on instinct. What do you guys think about the role of Weyland-Yutani in this film, and what can happen when corporatism goes unchecked? I mean, that's, to me, the allegory in the movie. We're going to talk about another allegory later on that some people read into this, which I think is interesting, but business run amok in the future. It seems it conflicts with this idealistic and idyllic picture we have of Martian colony, moon colony, and the riches of space and space travel and sophistication and technology. And then you just have the brutalism of American corporatism in space. And that's what I think I like the most, and what I think plays through in this movie, and I don't think plays through in the original, as I recall, which is that Weyland-Yutani is an American corporation. You would think in the future it would be whenever this takes place, there would be a world government or whatever the case might be. These guys are straight up American. The Marines, which I love, and we'll talk about them, are American Marines, which is awesome. Space Marines. And I love that. But it gets it. Do you like that conflict too? I love the brutalism of the fist of a corporation going into the wonder of space and just fucking it up. I mean, like immediately just going out and being like, yeah, well, we have a colony on an exomoon with an alien species on it with a bioweapon that we're going to try to reverse engineer. And it's like, oh, that sounds about right. So I'm wondering if you think it's obviously played up in quite villainy in some way.
Sure.
But I feel like it's not many paces off from what would happen. I don't think you would find some bioweapon somewhere left by an alien species and exploit it. But I can imagine a corporation going to a moon and being like, finding a rare mineral or some species that is valuable or something, and be like, yeah, we're going to exploit the shit out of this and destroy this place.
Absolutely.
And so it kind of sucks when you think about it that way. And I feel like Aliens approaches it in a more realistic way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating, right? And you think of all the good sci-fi that kind of centers itself around the evil or at least misguided corporation, right? It happens in RoboCop. You have things like Shinra in Final Fantasy VII, right? You have Genom and Bubblegum Crisis, Genom Corporation, and you have Weyland-Yutani and Aliens, where it's like, yeah, you have this global. Apparently, James Cameron was saying he, ironically enough, imagined it as like a multinational, like you're saying, a multinational corporation, but maybe the American troops are at the center of it as, their own private army or this own sanctioned bit of
which is
an
even more
army
sinister.
It's a little more sinister, and it's believable, right? Because if this is hundreds of years in the future and things stay relatively the same, and the United States has one of the biggest militaries, then maybe even if it is a multinational, maybe the United States is responsible for the military end of it if they were in it with countries like Japan and Australia, whoever, like allies, typical allies. And the Colonial Marines are fascinating, but
They're
I love
awesome.
that. I love having the evil corporation at the center of this thing because we already know that they're dubious from the first film, but they leave you guessing in this film as to the Burke character, as to the Bishop character, like what's going to happen this time. Do they have the greater good at the center of their considerations, or is this something that's all about blind greed and lust for riches, and again, like sort of screwing over the populace for the almighty dollar, that type of thing? It's a great thing. It's an insidious thing to have at the center of a story, specifically a sci-fi story like this, when they know that they're dealing with this unstoppable menace, and they're still sort of putting the dollar at the forefront. They're still trying to profit off it instead of trying to take a line to maybe try to deter this thing. They're trying to profit off it, which is pretty evil shit.
It's totally evil. By the way, I don't know if this is intentional. I feel like it must be. When I see things like this, I feel like it must be intentional because someone would ask the question. There's an interesting throwaway line about how I think it was the Nostromo cost $42 million, and they're saying like an adjusted money. And I like little things like that too because it suggests, first of all, that's an absurd sum. A ship like that would cost billions of dollars.
Yeah,
and
weird.
it suggests that at some point the U.S. dollar is maybe reset. There's an indication that something is going on Earth.
I love that.
Which is pretty interesting. And he says in adjusted money, he says that. So it's unclear if he's saying it's adjusted from some sort of literal readjustment with inflation or something
Great
happened to them.
dude.
So I like that. And and obviously it shows how no one's interested from the government about her at all. It's a corporation that's basically trying her, suspending her license and doing all of these kinds of things as well. Now we kind of went over her, but we really should get back to her. I mean, talk to me a little bit more about Ripley and talk to me about Sigourney Weaver's performance. I just find her, it's very similar to Battlestar Galactica. She's a woman, but I almost find her asexual, very similar to the way I look at Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica, where she's one of the boys or the boys are one of the girls, whatever. It's just kind of all mixed up in terms of gender, which is fun. You see that in the Marines a lot too. But Ellen Ripley is not sexualized in any way. Even when you see her in her panties and like her tank top, I don't think it's supposed to be sexy. I think it's supposed to be real and raw. And I just love it. I just love that character. I love the powerful female action lead. When she tapes the assault rifle to the flamethrower, I'm like, this is fucking nuts. I mean, this is awesome Rambo type shit. I mean, you can see it obviously, as we were saying, with the Cameron connection, but it's good stuff. And I find almost no flaw in this character. I find Ellen Ripley to just be really, really fascinating, endearing. You want to root for her. You like her. You don't care about anyone else really. And maybe that's a deficit as well, but it's all about her to me. So talk to me a little bit about Ripley herself.
I mean, what can you say about Sigourney Weaver, right? It's like she's such an 80s icon. She just emblazons into our consciousness, between Ghostbusters, between Aliens, between all the roles that she does. Just the skillfulness as an actress, as an actor. But yeah, she's such a large part in this film of the gravitas, of the grounding of this otherwise pretty crazy story, right? About these violent, rapey aliens just terrorizing outer space. She really brings the grounding agent for me. And, she's got the protective, fierce mother thing going on. If you want to see, it's a battle of mothers between the Queen Alien and Ripley. She's got sort of the vengeance that she brings and having a personal stake in all of this, with losing her daughter and being waylaid by this alien initially, and then having to return to having to return to this and deal with her trauma and her PTSD and just the sense of urgency. She's really haunted, and just how it affects her psyche. Like, you could see the distrust in her. You could see that she's gotten a little apathetic. She's really just a shell of herself, especially in the beginning of the movie. And she's really scarred by what happened in the initial movie. And I like bringing her back to reprise her role, but give her new stuff to do by giving her a new challenge, which is in a lot of ways the same as the initial challenge, right? And now she gets to face this thing down and realize her leadership abilities and all that kind of stuff. But just the performance for Sigourney Weaver is, again, like, you think of this 80s sci-fi movie with these practical effects and the ooze and the blood packets and all this crazy shit going off just beyond the reach of the camera off to the sides, and just bringing such a grounded performance to all that an actor or actress like this has to get this from the conception, from the initial first steps, from the script stage. She has to really understand her character and understand this world. And that's really in her performance. She really gets it. Sigourney Weaver just really gets it. And I think she's kind of the keystone that everybody's kind of centered around. And then there are a lot of other really wonderful, grounded, dramatic performances anchored to hers, I think. And, but it starts with her. It starts with James Cameron. It certainly starts with her. And I think, it's an iconic role. I think it helped put Sigourney Weaver on the map, certainly after things like Ghostbusters and her initial things. But, just those sincere acting chops. I don't know if she brings that from being on camera for so long on doing film, or if she's bringing in a little bit of her stage performance with that, but just through and through, like an iconic, it's someone you forget, like, that's not Sigourney Weaver up there. It's Ellen Ripley. And, you forget that's a movie star. You totally lose that in the thread of her performance.
Definitely. And I like that. I mean, not that it's a huge surprise, I suppose, but I like her reluctance in the beginning. She's kind of beaten down. She didn't do anything wrong. She's randomly found by scavengers, and she doesn't want to go back, and no one believes her. And this is where I think maybe there's a lost opportunity with the character of Burke, played by Paul Reiser. I love Paul Reiser. I think he's awesome. I forgot he was in it, and I was like, oh shit, Paul Reiser's in this. And he's an interesting guy in this, but I feel like there's a lost opportunity because, in not really remembering the ins and outs of the film, watching it, I was like, oh, Paul Reiser is kind of like a sympathetic character in some way, because he is representing her or whatever. And then he is there's an interesting scene where he's seeing that she's telling the truth, that like, this isn't crazy at all. And there's a time when like the acid blood gets near them, and she's like, she steps back and he's like, the acid blood. And she's like, yes. And I was like, oh, like, he's coming around being like, oh, everything that has been being said is true. And I was disappointed, I guess, in the betrayal, because I didn't feel like it was really necessary. Weyland-Yutani doesn't need a proxy. They are the overbearing force in the movie universe. So they didn't really need a man on the ground. What would have been cooler is a turncoat that turned against them and helped her. And I was disappointed that it didn't go in that direction, not really remembering the ins and outs. What did you think of Paul Reiser's character of Burke and kind of the betrayal? I felt it like it was just a little on the nose. I think it would have been cooler for it to go in the other direction, where he ends up sacrificing himself. Very similar to some other characters that come up short, who end up coming around later.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think about him? Because he pops up, and he's a pretty big cat in this roster of actors.
Absolutely. Even though this was early for him, he was already known for his comedy. I didn't realize that Paul Reiser necessarily, or I'd forgotten that he was a traditional stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
And I always thought of him, funnily enough, and I think a lot of me was channeling Mad About You, which from the early to the later 90s. He had a big run on that show opposite Helen Hunt. And I don't know if I was channeling his character in that, but I was just thinking about Paul Reiser, and I was being a little critical, in my head. I'm like, he's kind of smarmy. He's a little too cute, a little too cheeky, like kind of like a low rent Seinfeld or something.
Right.
Right. And maybe he's channeling all that old school, like, New York Jewish comedian thing, you know, dating back to like, you know, whoever, think of all the greats in comedy. And then I got into him a little bit and I said, let me go do a little bit of research and kind of inspect and go online and see a little bit of what his stand-up looked like. And ironically enough, he does channel a little Seinfeld in his flavor of comedy. Clean, clever, definitely funny, definitely sort of Northeast urban, sort of flavor to it, that type of thing. But I started to like him. And I watched some of his Tonight Show appearances. I watched him opposite Letterman. I watched him go on Leno, and he's very charismatic. He's always quick with a joke, very clever, and very fast. And I started to like him, and I said, no, I understand. There's a charisma here that I didn't see when I was a little younger. And I think in this movie, he does channel ultimately a good villain and a successful heel in a way, because you like you said, you are hoping that this guy's on the up and up for Ripley's sake. And he does seem to be on her side in the first half of the film. He's advocating for her. He sort of backs her up in different ways and sort of seems like her ally until you realize that this guy is going to stop at nothing, including sacrificing Ripley and Newt and this crew just to bring these things back for, you know, to propel himself, increase his station, profit, become a millionaire, billionaire, whatever's going to happen with this type of thing, you know, expand his standing in the company and all that kind of stuff. And he does a great job. You know, he's got that slick, charismatic, smooth talking thing where even the audience, I could remember myself watching this for the first time, even the audience, you're not sure if he's on the up and up, you know, and you're kind of looking for the villain because you remember Ash from the first Alien, you know, who's going to be the heel this time? And you don't necessarily see it. And even in repeated watchings, you're like, no, this guy could have totally been a good guy. He's pretty good at hiding that, you know, which makes him pretty insidious, pretty malevolent. And a great performance. And then this kind of rediscovering Paul Reiser now, of course, channeling a little bit of this for his role in Stranger Things, for those of you who have seen it. I feel like they're calling this up a little bit as one of those Ghostbuster-like nostalgia points for Stranger Things. It's like, yeah, put Paul Reiser in there. He was an icon because of Aliens, so we'll put him in and channel a little bit of Aliens through him. So yeah, but really just awesome, and again, very satisfying. I find this movie very satisfying in a lot of ways, but very satisfying end to this villain.
Yeah,
kind of gets his just desserts, proper payoff, and all that kind of stuff.
It's like, what was he even thinking at the end? That's what I was wondering. It's like, you think you're going to survive without the Marines? And it's like, well, you might as well just go down fighting.
Kind of, but also, why did Ripley tell him? Kind of reveal herself to him, like you're, you know, like we're gonna get back there. I'm gonna blow you up, basically. You know, I'm gonna tell everybody about what you did or whatever. Of course, he was given no choice,
right?
In a way, right? He had to kind of like the sabotage was inevitable. You know,
and I'll say that your references to Jerry Seinfeld, I don't think are unfounded, because I think they kind of blur together. Mad About You was on pretty much the entire time Seinfeld was on. It was on Tuesday, I think. But those commercials, like as you get older, must see TV and NBC and these goddamn 30-second spots and Mad About You's theme song, and then they're in their living room, and now you're in Seinfeld's living room. It's kind of all just blurs together, I think, for a lot of people. And I could see the connection beyond them both being New York comics, Jewish comics. I could see the connection. You know, there's more to it there. I totally agree. Very Woody Allen type.
Yes. Channeling situation. Woody Allen for sure. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, and they were contemporaries too. I mean, Paul Reiser and Jerry Seinfeld are pretty much contemporaries, just even with their stand-up careers.
I think they're friendly with each other.
Maybe one came a year before the other.
Yeah,
you know, as far as breakout performances. But you know, the other thing I have to say about Paul Reiser, he really is a very good dramatic actor, and he doesn't talk about smarmy and a little too cute and a little too cheeky. I think I was kind of off the mark with that, because he doesn't bring any of that comedy into his performance. He's not trying to incorporate those things that he's known for. Even as a breakout actor, his really first huge cinematic role, he's not trying to channel any of that. You know, he's saying that, you know, I could bring the dramatic acting chops as well, and not trying to incorporate any of that comedy in a cheesy way, which is pretty cool.
I agree.
You know?
And I think a smart move probably for his career at the time, probably very calculated move for him as well.
Sure.
Let's talk about finally the Marines. And Liam Meager wrote in and said, "Hey, Celestial, Colin, and Dark Side of the Moon Dagan. I have read that jockey James Cameron intended for Aliens to be an allegory for the American invasion of Vietnam.
Yes.
Do you think this is effective in conveying that? Wonderful podcast, and take care." Now, if Cameron intended that, then you can't say that that's not the intention of the film, since he is responsible for it. But I don't see the Vietnam stuff as much as I see now. Knowing that the movie was percolating in the late 70s and into the early 80s, you can see the Vietnam connection. Obviously, Rambo and other things are incredibly influenced by what was going on in Southeast Asia the decade before.
Sure.
So James Cameron's mind is certainly there, and many of his contemporaries were making movies like Platoon and Apocalypse Now and all that stuff. So there's no doubt that Vietnam was on everyone's mind, but I look at it more as my own interpretation was just more about Americanism and just brute force, hammer meets nail. And I love that is portrayed through the Marines. And the Marines, even a Bill Paxton's character, which I like Bill Paxton a lot, I'm disappointed that he ends up being a coward. I find it totally unrealistic and annoying, actually. I find it totally out of character. It's not like a man who was drafted into the army in 1944 and then he goes to Normandy and he's fucking in the corner of the landing ship and he never wanted to be there and all that. Like, you're a U.S. Marine, Bill Paxton. There's no way that you would be scared in this situation. I know Marines, quite a few. It would be impossible for me to imagine that they would break down. So that character annoyed me. But for all of that, man, you have Sergeant Apone, who's maybe my favorite character in the entire movie. Vasquez, who I think is maybe the coolest Marine. Oh. I love this crew of characters, and I was thinking about you because I know you appreciate this stuff like I do. It would have been fun to write these characters because you don't really have to worry about anything except for a personality quirk and maybe a little side story or background as to why they are the way they are. But otherwise, you can kind of make these characters into whomever you want. So what do you think about the Colonial Marines that were introduced?
I love these characters, dude. I think for as little as we ultimately get, I think they're so likable. I think you automatically tether yourself to them in this adventure or this sort of misadventure. And it's like, that's what makes it so memorable for me. You want to see more of them. And I often think, even when I watch it now, it's like, wow, this world is so crazy. You have Earth, humanity, this corporation, right, at the center of things. And by the way, your Star Wars, forgot to mention this, your Star Wars prequels that you wrote in our episodes centered around a corporation like this.
Yes.
And ultimately huge, but ultimately possibly insidious corporation, which is just, good sci-fi. And I feel like there's still room for it. Like, we see it sometimes in really cool stuff like Final Fantasy VII, RoboCop, that sort of thing, Bubblegum Crisis, but we don't see it a lot. It's not oversaturated. There's still room to play with it, I feel like. I think it channels a little bit of cyberpunk in a lot of ways. But I love the fact that these characters exist in this world because they're a military that we know, like, we see them sitting around eating their cornbread and their bug juice, right, at the mess hall. And we know these guys are familiar with each other. They've been with each other for a while. They're exchanging stories. It does call up that very Battlestar Galactica-esque co-ed men and women in the same fighting force. I think there was even a co-ed shower scene in this that was cut out, supposedly. So it does kind of exact this and enact this kind of brave new world, this futuristic thing where men and women fighting together in this fighting force. And not only that, but this world where humanity is reaching out into the stars and they're colonizing and they're expanding and it's a brave new world. There's new places to live and new places to explore. And in the front of that is these Marines, sort of like the aliens with the Xenomorphs. They're sort of the same thing. They're the ones that go in first, clear the way, or they're designed to fight whatever potential alien menace they encounter, right? So very Starship Troopers-esque. Definitely calls in B movies like Them and stuff like that, where it's like a fighting force against these potentially malevolent creatures. And I start looking at them interacting and I'm like, wow, what? They've been around together. There's a familiarity. That there's a camaraderie. What have these guys been through? What have they seen? They talk about bug hunts. they've obviously gone out to other worlds and had to, fight toe to toe these other aliens, these other beings and stuff like that. What kind of world is this? I want to see more of this. And I think with something like the Hudson character, it's like, okay, you get these badass Marines, right? They're on the drop shit. They're chest bumping. They're psyched. They're trying to psych each other up, right? There's a bravado. There's a sort of a sense of like, we can't be beaten, and besides the camaraderie, but also like just this gung-ho, very typical Marine type thing that they're ready. They're psyching themselves up. And then when they get there, even though we know they've been through these things before, whatever they're encountering now is so fearsome that it's turning they're tucking their tails and turning into cowards. I think that's really interesting. I think the Vietnam thing, the only thing I could think about with the Vietnam proxy with this story is like confronting a foe that you ultimately feel you're superior to. Yet when you actually get there and your boots are on the ground, ultimately you're completely underestimating that enemy and you encounter this unexpected ferocity or talent or tenacity. You're basically coming against something you completely misinterpreted, you completely underestimated. So I could see that, where it's like the Marines are used to going in. These guys are used to going in under APON, kicking ass, right? Taking their, getting theirs or whatever, getting psyched, getting in, getting out, surviving. They could, brag about their exploits over drinks and all that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of what they're used to in this world. Now they're encountering something different. This is like nothing they've ever run up against before. And I love each individual character. You want to see more of each one of these guys, whether it's Hudson, who initially is like the loudest and the most brash and then becomes the biggest coward. Or do you get a guy like Hicks, where it's like, that's the hero you want to be as a 12-year-old kid. You're looking at him. He's kind of selfless. He's extremely brave. He's got sympathy for the little kid. He's got sympathy for Ripley. He understands. He takes the time to teach them military tactics and weapons and all that kind of stuff. And you got all these different personalities. You got the heavy gunners like Vasquez and Drake, right? Where they got these computer-controlled smart guns. These
Those things
giant,
are so
huge
cool.
guns. Cool. The imagery is so cool.
Yeah, like it swivels on their hips. I read that that's a camera operating.
Yeah, Steadicam harnesses. Yeah,
which is super cool. I'm like, you could see yourself as a child co-opting one of those, much like you would co-opt other things and be like, this is now a machine gun. And I wonder if that came from some sort of idea like that, because I would totally, like when I would be in Dad's car in his like Explorer and I would pretend that the emergency brake button was like a machine gun or something.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like I would always do shit like that.
Totally though.
So I like that they repurposed that. I like clever things like that. I also like that, again, they seem to play the role. We just did the show Generation Kill a few months ago, which is about the Marines in Iraq. And I feel like they kind of get the little archetypes in there. The chick who'll kick your ass, even Gorman, the lieutenant or the officer who's incompetent. Like I can believe that, right? The incompetent officer who's not usually with them, the gunnery sergeant who's insane and chomping on a cigar or whatever. What I like that kind of stuff. I don't understand why they wanted a coward archetype. I don't feel like it fits the Marines and didn't add much to the movie other than frustration. In fact, I felt like Bill Paxton fell off a cliff because I felt like he was really cool at first. In fact, I don't want to skip this question. AJ Kyle says, hey, C&D, what are some of your favorite quotes from this film? Mine is Hudson's line during the drop ship sequence. We're on the old elevator express to hell going down. And are there any that stick in your head? And AJ, I wanted to answer that question with saying, yes, there are many, but let me see here if I can. Yeah, here it is. It's Gorman saying, any questions? And then Gorman says, what is it, Private? And Hudson says, how do I get out of this chicken shit out there? And Apone says, you secure that shit, Hudson, which I said at the beginning. I liked that. Like Hudson, I understand what they were saying with Hudson having a lot of bravado. And then when push comes to shove, he's a coward.
Sure.
But I don't know. It kind of bothered me. Not because I'm like a rah-rah U.S. Marine guy, but again, because I feel like it's just not realistic to the Marines. They're killing machines. They live for what was happening on that moon. And everyone encompassed that except for him. None of them backed down, except for Gorman, who was incompetent, but Gorman sacrificed himself.
Yeah, ultimately he redeems himself for sure.
So,
Gorman does.
I don't know. I wanted you to say, because I like Bill Paxton a lot. I think it was cool to see. I was like, oh yeah, the fuck is he doing in this?
He's great.
But I had a problem with that. I just thought that took me out of it a little bit.
Yeah, he carried it a little too far.
Right.
They even humanize characters like Hicks, right? Where he's the consummate hero. He's the action star. He's the one that sort of rallies the troops. He's, interestingly enough, sort of lower in the ranks. And even when Apone and Gorman are still alive, if you notice, like, the troops are kind of rallying to Hicks a little bit. Like, they're calling in Hicks to go see something first, which is interesting. They're kind of already responding to his leadership, even though he's like third in command at that point. But even a character like Hicks, when they first, you have that tense scene in the hallway, you have the tracker with that constant metronome, like a heartbeat, right? The tension's really ratcheted up. They haven't seen an alien yet. And then Newt scurries across the floor. It's Hicks who fires his gun accidentally. And Drake looks at him like, fuck, man, like that type of thing. So it even humanizes the Hicks character a little bit. I think the Hudson character could have explored that, like, all right, like, I'm not up to the, I'm going to tone down the tough guy thing a little bit because this is scary even for me, that type of thing. But Bill Paxton takes it so far that you even wonder if that's in the script or if that's just something he ran with.
Game over, man.
Like, why'd you put her in charge?
Yeah, it's like ridiculous. It's I don't know. It's a weird.
He's basically crying at certain points.
Exactly.
It is an interesting choice, and it definitely makes it memorable, and it's super meme worthy. But yeah, how it gets to be a little annoying, especially when you're kind of rooting for your little small pack of remaining heroes in that moment, and they really need him, and they say as much. It's like, come on, man, like, buck up, like, you guys only have a few guys left. We need you, type of thing.
Yeah,
and then Vasquez with that red headband, man. That's just like one of the visual icons of film.
She has like a tear tattoo or something, right? Like,
yeah, that's the other thing. She's got that small little thing on. I don't know if that's her left or right cheek, but that's the other thing that I never learned about before watching this making of documentary. That they all the performers got a kick at the can at decorating their own armor and camo and weapons. They brandished the paint pens. Brandish the old paints, and they drew on their tattoos and their little slogans.
Yeah, Bill Paxton had like a necklace of like barbed wire, which I thought was cool.
Yes, so cool. They got to do their own.
Yeah, definitely.
Besides a little bit of training that they got, and you already talked about Apone. You got that cigar chomping.
He's awesome. Commander.
Just his whole function is to inspire confidence in his troops with his comedy, his lightheartedness. He could be as scared as anybody, but he can't show it. His job is to rally their confidence and get them hyped up, for the battle to come. And, he's so, I know that, what's his name? Al Matthews I think he was a Marine in Vietnam in the shit, if I'm not mistaken, but he definitely channeled that realistic, authentic military leadership. I'm not sure he was an actual drill sergeant, but he definitely has that sort of drill sergeant-esque thing in his performance, which is he's a joy in this, dude.
He was awesome
so much.
I love that line. You secure that shit. That's an amazing line.
And then he calls him over at the end.
I just love it. Like, that's why it was so funny. Like, I love the line from Hudson. How do I get out of this chicken shit outfit? It's an amazing line. Yeah.
Such a good
they're like
quote.
Earnestly asking if there are any questions before they like drop the mood. So that was a little bit disappointing that they didn't follow that through with Hudson. But I wanted to ask a little bit about the visual effects. And Nixie wrote in about this and said, I only just watched Alien and Aliens a few months ago, and I must say that the visual effects have aged wonderfully in both. The battle with the Queen in particular looks fantastic. Some truly incredible use of puppetry and miniatures. Ash and Bishop are also so cleverly used in fun ways once both are dismembered. I agree. There are a few things that don't stand up, specifically any green screening, which is very minimal in this movie. It just doesn't look right. And I don't know what was going on in the 80s with that, but when they're dropping to the moon, it doesn't look good. Other than that, it does look great. And a lot of it does. I was telling Micah, because she was surprised. I was like, yeah, a lot of this is miniatures. Like, you can actually kind of tell, but you have to really know to look that's how they do things. And it looks great. And I think it's very Star Wars-esque in the sense that they embrace practical effects as much as possible. I think some of the flight scenes in space don't look right. It's interesting to see how different creators interpret space travel through the stars, and how I think it just looks so good in Star Wars, and don't really know why you wouldn't try to give it more texture. Like, it doesn't look like it's over a mat of stars, but rather in the stars. It doesn't really make any sense because the stars aren't that close. But so you wouldn't really, like, you're never going to be close enough to a star to look to your left and see the star. You'd be in the system. Otherwise, the star is going to be many, many light years away from you. But still, it adds a little bit of texture. But that would be my only complaint. One of the things I like, though, Dig, and I did write this down, and I wanted to get your input on this, is I always love how movies in the past predict the future and what they get right and what they get wrong. And one of the things I think they absolutely nail in this movie, which is awesome, is the way the Marines have their cameras hooked up and that some controller is watching all of them. That wasn't happening in the 80s, and that is the way it works now. And I thought that was right on. I was really impressed by that. And some of the other stuff was pretty cool too, like having each person's name in the corner, the runtime of the mission, all of that. I mean, that's very accurate and true to form. But then there's other funny stuff. Paul Reiser's fumbling with dot matrix printouts. The picture of Ripley's daughter is given to her, and it's like hyper pixelated. It's like, why would it look like this? And all of that. So it's funny how they get some things wrong. But I think that, and I hate using the word gritty because it's so overused in this respect, but
yeah,
the down home, dirty grit of what I think space travel is going to be like by nature, because you have no manufacturing. I mean, maybe you'll be able to 3D print stuff and all that, but you're going to be dealing with the same stuff over and over again. Lots of grease and oil and dirt and grime. And I think that they especially capture it in that scene, which I guess is cut from the original too, when that guy with the gut is like walking through the moon station.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And they're like talking to each other. And he says it's actually a pretty interesting thing for exposition, because he says how it takes them 2 weeks to communicate back home.
Right.
Which actually isn't very long when you consider it, but it doesn't mean, it means that they're not that far away, which is kind of interesting. Or they have some way to hyper light speed send their messages. But nonetheless, they touch on that, and they touch on about kind of their own isolation. I think I think the movie really nails its tech. And again, just being in full embrace of practical effects, it saves you. And I don't know how people can continue to look at movies like this and the original Star Wars and stuff, and then compare them to the prequels and say that any other choice should ever be made. So what did you think about, with your eye, the special effects?
Yeah, they hold up so well, man. Just not only the effects, but like you're saying, the design of things. You know, first of all, it's a really cool and historical era for effects, the mid 80s, because you're in an era now that's incorporating everything. You know, you have the puppetry, you have the suits, people in suits, you have some stop motion, you have some miniature work, you have the rear projection, which is a lot of that in this film. Some primitive CG. I know specifically like some of the electrical effects, the shock, the electrical waves and stuff like that. Really primitive, not overused, but early CG in here. And then you have all the practical stuff in this film, especially. You have the blood and the goo and the viscera and the android intestines, and the way you're kind of making everything look realistic and believable on camera, besides what you're saying about just the lived in environments and how that just grounds sci-fi. It's just good stuff, starting with Star Wars and the first Alien, and coming out of that B-movie initial thing where we had to make everything look, making it futuristic was making it look pristine, which was, right, you know, kind of the way sci-fi was for a long time. And, you know, I love comparing it to Star Wars because you see all of those things. You have the motion control cameras, you have depiction of outer space with matte paintings, possibly some early CG or some colored gels under camera and stuff, but it's not as successful. I thought actually in many ways that Alien was more successful with all of that stuff 7 years prior, 6 or 7 years prior, which was interesting. But there are some effects that first of all, I just want to continue to do what you did and praise the design of stuff, right? The pulse rifles, the smart guns, the incinerators, the tech and the quarters, the living quarters of everything, the lab, the laptop computers. Like a lot of it it still really holds up. There's that one really beautiful scene in the beginning where where that team, the salvage team, is coming in, and they come into Ripley's quarters and she's still in cryo sleep. And those two machines come in first, in front of the humans to kind of inspect and clear the way or whatever. It's just gorgeously done. But even the way those machines move, and just the atmosphere with the ice crystals on the cryo sleepers and stuff, really, really neat. And I think it's hard now, right? Because we talk about, especially this film, sort of affecting pop culture in general with its ripple effect and its fallout, right? We talk about its effect and its influence on video games and film and sci-fi and certainly books and comic books and all that kind of stuff. And just the imprint the Alien franchise left, especially the early films, left on everything. And you realize, like, it's such an authentic, unique, believable world that this thing created and then influenced all these artists and craftsmen going forward. But the ironic thing is that a lot of this stuff still holds up in its own right. The things that it created as competition in future years or future decades, you still go back and like, no, that, like, Hicks's pulse rifle looks badass, even by 2022 standards. Even by 2022 standards, the Ripley's a little apartment in Gateway Station looks pretty cool, like, even compared to what they could come up with today and with the aid of CG and all that kind of stuff. So I love that it kind of has that lasting power, and that, this movie still holds up in a lot of ways. Now, not in every way. Specifically, the Xenomorph Warriors, and I think there's one scene in particular where they break into miniature, or with the alien queen, I think when she rips off from her embryo and they show her running, like, it gets a little Muppety. You know what I mean? Those are the parts where it's like, I would love to see this remade in CG just to get the weight of what this 10,000-pound alien queen must really feel like, because you don't really get the weight. You don't get the weight in, like, these hulking Xenomorph warriors bearing down on you. They get very puppety. They start to defy gravity because it's guys in suits and things being pulled on strings and puppets and stuff like that. So that's where it falls a little flat by today's standards, but I certainly didn't realize that as a 12-year-old. Now I look at it and I'm like, oh shit, like, the Xenomorphs are worth a little more than that. Like, let's make them look properly scary. Now, they do some cool stuff with the Xenomorph, like when Newt's in the little sewer and she's up to her chest in water and the one comes out from behind her. That's still scary, dude. That still holds up, and I just think the Xenomorphs are kind of frightening for me.
Yeah, they're definitely scary.
The proposition of that thing is, and just what it's capable of and how it's built and what it's made of, and its ferocity is just like, yeah, that's still scary. I still think about that at night when I go downstairs for a snack. I don't want there to be a Xenomorph in the kitchen.
Oh my God, it'd be the end. I feel like what I like about the Xenomorph too, and I think we talked about this in the original Alien, is just being some sort of weapon itself. It even hurts when it dies by having this acid blood. It's awesome. And I love the scene when Hicks is, like, taking his armor off, which is another good look at their different technologies as well, cool, that they're using. I wanted to bring up too the machine, like the moving mech machine that she fights the queen with. I feel like obviously this doesn't predate anime using mechs, but I wonder if this was inspirational for anything like Front Mission or whatever. I don't know. I look at that and I looked at that scene and I was like, first of all, this looks awesome. Second of all, it's cool. Like, it's authentically cool. It's not corny or campy or anything. It makes sense. She's familiar with these machines. And one of the things I liked about the queen fight too was just her teeth. They're clear. Which is, I think, is maybe the Xenomorphs are as well, but you can't really tell because they're so small. But I loved that it was like some sort of plasticine clear thing that wasn't translucent, but you could see you wanted to see through it. A lot of really cool design decisions with there too. And also the way that the way that Ripley and the queen kind of danced at the end when she's like ripping apart the eggs. And I don't know if I was right in the interpretation that they were kind of like having an agreement to back away from each other, but then
that went on, sure.
And then Ripley attacks her again or whatever, which is
dude, that might be my favorite moment in the whole film. Yeah, you're talking about the scene where she's confronting the queen. The queen's laying her eggs, still attached to her little embryo egg laying thing. And then the warriors, the queen sort of tells the warriors to back off. And they do, because Ripley has the blowtorch. And they sort of back up a little bit, right? But then one of the eggs open. And she looks at it, And the queen, they have their little quiet agreement for a second. And then one of the eggs opens, the flap of the eggs opens up, and Ripley literally goes like this. All right. Like, you know, she like gives this look like, all right, I guess it's on then. You know what I mean? Like the queen is still trying to defy that silent pact with that egg opening. And Ripley's like, fuck that. And then that's when she just kind of opens up with the incinerator. It just starts taking everything out, which is amazing. And then, of course, the Warriors have no choice but to proceed. And I like that they're not invincible. You know, they're just ferocious, and they're in such an enormous number. It's like it's really like a beehive, like a hive of wasps.
Yeah,
you know, their strength is in numbers and what they're willing to do. You know what I mean? That's what makes them such a fearsome opponent, which is, you know, super cool. And I love that you brought up the loader. You know, that early mech. It is interesting. Like, it's one of those things where I think of like modern mech. If they did it today, it would be more Gundam-like or more slick in some way. But there was already very cool armored piloted mech in anime with things like the Valkyrie and Robotech, which is still, by today's standards, a very modern looking mech. So I think that might just be a thing of James Cameron and company, Stan Winston and all the powers that be, just not knowing enough about Japanese comics, manga, anime at that time, because that could have looked even cooler. But it does still hold up today, and that big sort of clunky orange loader mech is such an icon. I don't know if we'd want it any other way. You know, it just Definitely. Stands out now as so emblematic visually. One of those, you know, things that you always call up by and by, that when you think of this movie and you think of the images, you think of that loader and the battle with the Queen Alien. And how one thing I thought of that made me laugh and made me think of you was like, this movie just keeps having endings, like when we used to play action figures.
Right.
You know, it's like, all right, it's over. No, the Queen was hanging on to the, you know, Bishop gets torn apart. It's like so crazy. It just keeps going.
I kind of started to get bored at the end, personally. But that's just me, because I was like, all right.
Right. It goes on a little long.
We understand. And by the way, one thing I noticed in the aftermath of the fight towards the end, I think Ripley is hooked up to an IV bag, and the IV bag says 787 on it, and it annoyed the shit out of me because it's July 1987. It's probably when it expired, and I was like, that annoyed me so much because there's a bunch of writing on it. Then it says 07/87, and
that's a good call up.
Yeah,
wow,
I was like, wow, that's funny.
Good eye, dude.
But let's get through a few of these last questions as we wrap up.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Ruben Barrett wrote in and said, do you think aliens exist? And if so, would you prefer humans discover this type of primitive alien, or I don't know if they're so primitive, or intelligent beings we could communicate with? How would you like us to first encounter life, Dagan? And in what respect do you think it will happen first?
I think about this every time I watch a movie with extraterrestrials or aliens. I always think about this, like, how is it going to pan out in real life? Are we going to find, when we find other life out there, is it going to be something aggressive or competitive in nature? Or is it going to be some type of thing where it's like an instant or near instant thing of like, let's combine, two heads are better than one type of thing. Like, let's get together and understand each other and learn from each other, that type of thing. It is, I always think about this. I don't really know. I know how I want it to pan out, because if what's out there is beholden to what's in our imaginations or the potential of our imaginations, it's pretty frightening.
Yes,
to think about scale and technology and how much more evolved things could be as compared to current humanity out there. But, you know, and who knows? I always think about this. I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast before, there's this great OAV from the late 80s anime, late 80s, early 90s, called Gunbuster. And the whole conceit with this thing is there's a very xenomorph-like alien faction attacking humanity whenever they get to the certain part of the galaxy as they're exploring, or, you know, solar system as they're exploring. They can never get past this part. And people go out and they always just completely annihilate any kind of semblance of humanity that manages to get, that has the courage to go out there. Turns out that the galaxy is like one big living organism. And these things are the white blood cells that think that humans are like an invading faction, a disease. And they're not bad. They're just doing what they're beholden to do, their job. Think that they're annihilating a scourge that's coming their way. And they're just doing this in like a very matter of fact fashion, unemotional fashion. And I always think of that. And that's even a thing. Like, who knows? Like, what, it's boundless to think about.
Yeah, I agree.
You know what I mean? What about you? I mean, if you think, I know how I want it to pan out, I don't think we need to deal with, although I'll say this part.
Alien invasion would be awesome. Come on.
Alien invasion would be cool. One reason it would be cool, because the whole entire Earth would have to suspend any sort of disagreement or bad blood and come together in the face of a common enemy. I think we've talked about this on the show before.
Definitely.
That's one thing that would be intriguing for humanity that I don't think we've ever seen on Earth.
I think there was no, definitely not. There was a Harry Turtledove novel, I think, from the 90s that was about an alien invasion during World War II, in which like everyone had to stop fighting.
That's cool.
And fight
Great idea.
the aliens together. Yeah, it is an interesting idea. I watch a lot of lectures and philosophical talks about this kind of stuff. And I think the common thing is that we look at it through human eyes, and what the term is human nature. We have no frame of reference, none, about how this would go. And that's what I loved about that movie Arrival, which I think we've talked about in the past, is so good because we don't even know how to communicate or what we're communicating. The very nature of sharing an idea or information, that movie dealt, I think, wonderfully with that. And so I think about issues of time and space in terms of when something is and where something is. When is a massive question when the universe is 13 billion years old. It could be that massive civilizations have risen and fallen and risen and fallen and risen and fallen and risen and fallen many, many times in that time. And in just our Milky Way galaxy, nonetheless, what's going on elsewhere, it's impossible to imagine that there isn't copious life, but it's a matter of where and when that life was. And that's why I think it's going to be hard to encounter life that is not intelligent, because it no doubt exists. It probably exists in our system. And that's why I think we might find it on Titan or an Io or whatever, but there's no signal. So you're gonna have to go and find it yourself. I think it's much more likely that you find aliens by encountering them, and not encountering them in a spaceship, but encountering a beam or a message. Or remember, we've sent out certain satellites that have left the system that have plaques on them telling people where we are. And
that's so great.
Like with mathematics, by pointing at pulsars and trying to search. And we tried to figure out, it was Carl Sagan that tried to figure out how do we communicate with them, right? Famously, we have a man and a woman on the plaque. And originally the man and woman were holding hands. And Carl Sagan said, you can't do that because they're going to think it's one organism.
Right? Oh, right. And holy shit. That's fascinating.
So it's things like that. And we were trying to figure out universal things to talk about. So we put like a nucleotide or something, and like a mathematical equation for carbon atoms and all this kind of stuff, because we think that they might understand some of that stuff,
right?
Or like they'll realize what we're trying to say. But that's what's so fascinating about it, is that we have no frame of reference. I don't think no matter what we predict, it will happen the way we think it will happen. And I like that you use the word when, because some people use the word if, and I think you can use the word if reasonably. Not that life doesn't exist, but that we might die before we find it. It's reasonable enough to, in the Expanse, the University of the Expanse, they deal with it really well, where we're really confined to the solar system. And there's no alien life, and it's them yet. I mean, that's what kind of the movie is about, or the show's about, the books. But they exist in this spacefaring situation where it's not about that. It's not about aliens. It's about commerce and crime and smuggling and all sorts of shit. So it's a long-winded way of saying I don't know, because I just don't think we have the frame of reference. Like, I don't think we even use the term life as we know it. Carbon-based, amino acid-based life. We clearly, the alien xenomorphs don't work like that. Also, Bishop doesn't work like that. Right. So already you're introducing all these elements that make no sense. So I just don't think we have a frame of reference or any sort of understanding. I also think it's possible that we just don't even know what to look for. I mean, we're talking about species, and we've talked about this in the past, that there's this idea of a Dyson sphere, which is this idea that you build a sphere around a star and none of the energy gets out, and you are able to just use all of the energy from the star for your purposes. And there's a theory that that's what an alien species would do, because they wouldn't need the natural light. They'd be well beyond that. They can manufacture it themselves. Instead, they'd have basically unlimited nuclear power to do whatever they want with. And so we might be looking for stars that are simply not visible because their gravity is working, but their light isn't working. Right.
That's fascinating.
So it might be such that when a species reaches a certain point, you won't see their star,
right?
Because they're hiding it, because they're literally gleaming everything off of it.
Wow.
And so it's good. I love that shit. And I know you do
it's
too.
fascinating. So, it's mind bending, right? Like you
definitely.
think that exactly what you're saying. Like, what, if any, common ground can we find, even for identification, let alone communication? That's the thing. It's like the potential obstacles, impediments, differences are, they could be potentially limitless. You know what I mean? So it's like, what common ground could we glean in there to even identify, let alone communicate, let alone coexist with something that we're putting all our own human stipulations on these things in terms of scale, structure, intelligence, all these things, right? I mean, it's potentially, it's completely dimension is another fact. Like, who knows, right? Time, that's another thing. That's still my biggest thing, is like, when we see these typical gray aliens that people have said to encounter or have interacted with over the years, that's to me, it's like, that's future humans coming back to time travel. We finally harness time travel. We look like that now. Little bodies, big brains.
Yeah, no need. That's exactly what happened to the Independence Day aliens, is that they were like these little meek things. It was their
right. That's exactly right.
Because they didn't need to be anything more than that, because they had this great mind and technology.
Right. So they could just think it through.
Right. I think that's interesting. I was always fascinated by the grays, as I think they're called, the aliens, because there is some theory that obviously that those kinds of things are feeding each other's memories or their lies or whatever. But there's also this theory that that's the alien, like that's the alien species that's here. Like, that's
that alone is fascinating.
Yeah, it's scary. It's some Ray Bradbury shit.
It's almost too much. It's almost too much.
It is. Jacob wrote in about sound and music. He says, music can add a lot to a scene, but I often find myself more appreciative of moments where it is intentionally absent. When Ripley and Newt come face to face with the alien queen and all you can hear is the atmosphere of the room, their queen's breathing, and see the tension in Sigourney Weaver's performance, it's simply an arresting moment. I also appreciate the wordless way Ripley and the queen communicate, and the look Ripley gives before torching the eggs is the embodiment of really bitch, as you said earlier. A quiet little sequence amid a raucous struggle for survival. I wanted to bring up sound because I think that no genre can use sound like sci-fi can. And the reason I believe that is because you can't hear anything in space. And being able to play with that, and I'm not saying on a spaceship, you can't hear anything where there is a vacuum. Right. Including on Earth. If you were to somehow to be in a chamber in a vacuum, which would kill you, you couldn't hear because there's no air for your sound waves to travel upon. So, and I think it's, you can't hear in space, they can't hear you scream, comes from Alien, doesn't it? So
yeah,
the original Alien.
The original, yep.
I agree and love the use of sound in this because I love when they just cut it off. And I'm not even the Queen's movement or whatever, but just cut the sound off.
Yeah.
They do it once, which I think was a little weird, where she's trying to break the glass and no one can hear anything on the other side. It wouldn't sound like that. Like they might be muffled, but that's plexiglass.
Right.
So I didn't really understand that, but I loved how they just dropped it off. It reminded me a lot of Dead Space again and how they play with sound. And Battlestar Galactica, as we keep bringing up, also does a really great job of it. Star Wars is kind of silly. I love Star Wars, but when the X-Wings and the TIE fighters are dogfighting, it would be silent. You would hear like rattling in your cockpit. Whatever was making sound in the cockpit, you would hear.
Right.
But anything happening outside, you wouldn't hear it. The explosions, anything. And so Star Wars was always a little weird with that because they're like flying. You hear all the noises. The TIE fighter makes a certain noise. You wouldn't hear the shit when the TIE fighter was flying by. And in an atmosphere, you'd hear it.
Right.
So I like that it gets a little more realistic here. And I really appreciate that. It makes space scary. What do you think of the sound design?
Yeah, and Battlestar plays with that, where they kind of like they fire the Colonial Vipers fire. You don't necessarily hear. You hear some sort of. It's more feel than hear than straight up audio. But of course, I could understand doing it both ways. You want to call in those awesome Ben Burt sound effects and all that kind of stuff. Of course.
And the audience doesn't necessarily know that or instinctively understand that or
you're not
care
thinking
about that. Right.
Right, exactly. As long as it works, right? As long as you're consistent. You can't do both. But the audio is quite an achievement in this film. And I know that's something that the audio sort of additions and editing and all that kind of stuff was a big part of cobbling this film together. And James Horner's music, I think, is iconic. I know that they had very little time to do. I think he had 7 weeks, and then they were still when he arrived on.
Yeah, there was a lot of drama behind this movie, which I didn't.
A lot of drama, dude.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that probably stems from James Cameron. In all fairness, he's supposedly not the most easy guy to work with. I think he's a notorious perfectionist.
Auteur. Yeah.
I think so. I think he's kind of set in his ways. I think he is very talented, but it's his way or the highway type of thing, is what it seems like to me. But I think at the end of it, like that 7 weeks turned to like 3 or 4 weeks or something. And I think it's really iconic. The musical cues, the military cues, and the whole Marines bit with the marching drums and everything like that. You have that iconic sort of shrieking, crawling sting that they use throughout. I think they use it very successfully when the one Colonial that they find cocooned opens her eyes, and that before the chest burster bursts out, they have that one sting that just feels like an alien, feels like a xenomorph. And then just like the sound of the pulse rifles, you realize how iconic that is. The sound of the shrieking aliens as they're getting blasted apart. That was really almost as iconic as some of the H.R. Giger visuals in this film. You got to put the sound right up there with that. One thing I was thinking about, though, Kyle, with the music in this film, there's that one part of James Horner's score that sounds exactly like the Star Wars trench run. It's like that John Williams, like dun 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 dun, that they use, I believe, a couple of times in the film, particularly at the end with the alien queen fight and escaping on the dropship with Bishop. It's just too funny, dude. It's like, it sounds exactly like it. Like I think they probably started with something that was inspired by it, and then just ended up grabbing it, straight up lifting it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what happens when a book is published and they accidentally don't cite something. Like, oh, we accidentally stole this.
Right, like maybe that was a placeholder.
Right, exactly.
That meant to get around to making it a little different. That actually happened in a 311
song. There was a 311 song that had like some other dude's total sample in it. And
oh shit!
I believe them because they never had another situation like this in 30 years. But they were basically like, we had all of these samples mixing up in our demos so much that we thought we wrote it.
Oh wow! Yeah. They forgot,
and so they cleared it up. But yeah, I was like, so that's funny. I guess it does happen. Dig, let's talk about favorite scene. And Kabuto Kishi writes in about mine. He says, "Hey, LV426, Colin and Engineer Dagan. I love Aliens even more than Alien. I think it's actually crazy that they somehow managed to somewhat seamlessly transition a horror movie into a sci-fi action franchise. One of my favorite scenes in any movie I've ever seen is when the automated turrets are trying to fend off the aliens, and we, the viewers, along with the soldiers, are left to just watch the bullet count steadily descend until it hits 0. I think of this scene often, almost like you're putting a blind faith in this thing to handle the danger for you, but you can slowly watch its failing as you are overwhelmed." Yeah, I love that scene too. That was probably my most memorable scene in the movie. And it's amazing that they just cut all of the turret stuff out of the original. Which
I never knew it existed.
I'm confused by it because I was talking to Mike about it. I was like, she's like, why did they cut some of this stuff? And I was like, I imagine the production company said that you got to cut 15 minutes off this movie. And they figured out how to do it. And I feel like it was not the right idea. I feel like all of it kind of needed to be there. So I really like that scene too. It's very tense. And again, I like the predictiveness of the technology. The technology is routing the bullet count to the computer monitor. I also love the counters on the side of the pulse rifles. I think that's really cool too. So cool. So I really like that scene. Does any scene specifically stand out to you in Aliens?
Yeah, that scene, again, that automatic gun turret scene, never knew it existed until a few days ago because I had never seen that extended cut. And it was interesting the way they carried that out, because the first time you see there's guns A through D, right? So the first time you see guns A through B, they're set up to auto detect and then eliminate whatever movements in front of them. So hypothetically, when the xenomorphs come through, they're going to open fire. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first 2 guns, you see them ticking down and the xenomorphs just, you don't even know that the xenomorphs are there. They're not even saying anything. They're just saying the guns are ticking down. So I initially thought, because the xenomorphs have shown some problem solving ability, did they kind of devise something of their own hand to trick the guns into firing? But what it was, and the second time when you see guns C and D, is that they just keep coming. That's the only thing. It's like those guns have limited ammo and they're just going to keep coming. And that plays into the ferocity and the tenacity of this foe, that they're not going to stop at anything. Their whole job is to protect their queen, just like a wasp. And again, like playing up the fact of like, there is no stopping these things. There's an unlimited amount of these things. They're just going to keep coming. There's no, it doesn't matter how much ammo you waste. Doesn't matter how many clever things you rig up. They're not going to stop. And I love like promoting the horror of the aliens through that. You know, it's like, I think they leave that one last gun with like 10 rounds in it or something.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, well, when they come back, you know, they're not going to know that that's the case. They're just going to come back. And guess what? That thing's going to shoot 10 rounds and then they're going to overwhelm us.
But I also like the point I think they make, which is that the aliens are smart enough to know that gun was mowing them down, but they don't know that the gun is almost out of ammo.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. There's like, it's like it's an intelligence, but it's not quite a human intelligence. It just happens to be enough because they're so crazed, such a crazed enemy. And, you know, the other thing too, that's important to say about the aliens, especially we see this in the Queen, is that like humans, there's an emotion in what they do. They're not just hunting down and eating something like a great white. You know, Ripley took out this thing's kids and she wants to do the same thing. That's why she comes up in that elevator. She wants Ripley's kid. You know, she wants to win and you know, she wants her vengeance. You know, she wants her payback.
Indeed.
And that's interesting. You know, that gives that enemy a little bit even more ferocity for me.
Grabalicious wrote in about something. I wanted to kind of nip this in the bud. Not that he's wrong, but I wanted to talk about this topic. He said, let's rock C&D. One of my favorite films of all time in recent years is Aliens. And I asked myself this question a lot. Would this get the same acclaim in today's charged political environment? It's hard not to imagine that a female lead franchise wouldn't meet some resistance from certain corners of the internet. This installment really leans into the motherhood theme too. I can only imagine what the fanboy hype culture would have made of the trailers before release. Here's to seeing in the new year with the most quotable film of all time. Take care. Thank you for writing in. I just totally disagree with this take. And I feel like a lot of the misogyny, anti-woman, I feel like a lot of that shit is just manufactured. Nerd culture has a very long history of women protagonists, women female heroes, multicultural heroes, black heroes, whatever the case might be. When you talk about Star Wars all the time with Leia and Lando, that wasn't a thing. I think when they sexualized Leia in Jedi, I think that was a surprise to a lot of people, frankly. And I never look at her sexually. I never had a thing for Princess Leia because she was Princess Leia, like someone you revered and loved. It would be like having a crush on Luke Skywalker or something. I just don't imagine that people really feel that way about him. Maybe they do. And I just feel like a lot of this there's a lot of faux misogyny. There's certainly a lot of real misogyny, but I think a lot of it is caught up in anything a woman does that is criticized as misogynistic. For instance, 2016 Ghostbusters, which is widely panned. I think people hate it because it's not good. I don't think people hate it because it has women in it. People love Melissa McCarthy and those guys. You know, so I feel like I appreciate the question, but I just feel like a lot of this is just so false. How can you look at an industry or a fandom, Game of Thrones, or some of the biggest things, Handmaid's Tale, and these are women characters, a lot of women protagonists, women heroes, women villains. I don't think it would be a big deal at all. In fact, I was surprised it's not a bigger deal then than it would be now. And I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I wanted to just to talk about that briefly because it was.
You know, I don't even. It's so funny. I love this movie so much, and I think it has so much going for it, and it's so much fun that I don't even think about whether the primary hero, the primary protagonist is male or female. I just think Ripley is so good. It defies gender almost. It's like, it doesn't even matter if that's a man or a woman. It's just that character is so good and you're rooting for this group of people. And also, you know, Ripley is a woman, but she's also buoyed by a strong male character in Hicks. You know, and you would argue in Bishop. I know he's an android. He's not a male, but you know what I mean? So if you're looking at the four main characters in Bishop and Hicks and Ripley and Newt, it's actually kind of balanced. So it's funny that it even comes up because I don't even think of it in a gender capacity. I just think, wow, this is a great movie. This is a great action hero. One of the iconic greats. It's like, it's kind of almost to me in the same breath as dwelling on Wonder Woman or something. It's just like it happens to be a cool character. You know what I mean? Like the gender is certainly part of it.
Right.
Can't escape from that. But it just happens to be an iconic character that we grew up with. That just, we almost take for granted. That's just super cool. We don't even think about it beyond that.
I agree, dude. I saw a video the other day going around, like a TikTok video. I'm not on TikTok, but it was on Twitter or something. I'm too old for TikTok. I don't even really understand it, to be honest. But I'm like just now wrapping my head around Discord. It's been like 5 years. I'm like, okay, now I really feel like I finally understand what this is. And so I was seeing this video going around, and people were asking like, how did you? And it was like a Gen X guy or an early millennial like me saying, how did you survive with race and sex back then? And the guy answered like, we didn't talk about it. And I know that that's an easy answer for a lot of people. I also know that it's an inaccurate answer for many people's experiences, but the fact remains that growing up in the 70s and 80s and the 90s in very multicultural Long Island, surrounded by Black people and Hispanic people and all sorts of people, race never came up. It was not a thing where people were being racist to each other. I didn't think about having a Black friend or a Hispanic friend. When I was first taught about thinking about gender and race and all that was college. And you know what really reaffirmed it in me was my adult life. It wasn't something that was embedded in us as kids. So when it just wasn't. So when we saw Lady J or CoverGirl in G.I. Joe, it was like, cool, now my sister can join in or whatever. Or we see Princess Leia and we have great admiration for her as royalty. Or we see Ripley, or we see Sarah Connor, or it's just, I don't know how you can look at, or Khaleesi or whatever. I just don't understand how you can look at all of these things, or even Cersei and all of these villains.
Sure.
Maleficent, like all these different things. Like who gives it? Ursula? Who is talking about these being women or men? I feel like it's a 21st century phenomenon that mistakes your personality as your gender and race. And if that's your default personality as your gender and race, you're fucking boring. And you're the one ruining everything.
Yeah, so, I totally agree.
Sorry to go off on a tangent, but geez, I have to say
it's not. It's true. It's like it never really was a part of the conversation, whether in real life or in pop culture. It was just some villains were female, some were male, some heroes were female, some were male, some superheroes were male, some were female. Even through things like the X-Men and things into the 90s, like it just, you always expected both in any capacity. Right. And I love drawing it up with music too. It's like, who cares if a great song has male or female vocalists? Think of Fleetwood Mac. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. You expected both. You expected either or. There was Michael Jackson and there was Madonna. You know what I mean? It didn't matter.
And then there was Michael Jackson
somewhere in the middle.
And then there was Michael Jackson be trying to become white, which was his whole different thing.
It's a whole other thing.
All right. Jake James Lugo writes in and says, how's it going, guys? Here's a fun question.
Hey.
Why do you feel they never made a game based on aliens specifically? We got video games on Alien 3 for multiple consoles. I think that was an NES game. To varying degrees in quality, and we also got a bunch of Alien versus Predator, Alien Colonial Marines, etc. Alien Colonial Marines, of course, itself was a disaster. But we never saw an adaptation of the best movie in the series. Do you think it could have worked in the 90s if they had made one? And what type of game would you want it to be? So I looked into this. There is a PC and Amiga game, I think, but that wouldn't be something we were familiar with. Mostly in the US.
No. Early PC, no.
I think Alien Isolation, which came out in 2014, deals a lot with aliens. I haven't played it yet, but a person I respect a great deal, Ryan McCaffrey at IGN, loves that game. And so I've always really that's like always been on my long burn backlog, like a game I really need to get to. But here's my answer to this is that I don't think we need an aliens game. Why can't a movie stay a movie? Why can't a game remain a game? I always make that argument on Sacred Symbols. As excited as I am about, I'm not really excited, but as interested as I am to see The Last of Us on HBO, we don't need that. And I think you're going to see real soon how little you need an Uncharted movie when that thing comes out in a few weeks. So like that I'm obviously going to go see it because I need to do Sacred Symbols Plus on it, but I think we all know where that's going. So my answer, Jake James, is that I don't think we really need one. And if we had one, it would obviously have to be some sort of survival horror game, which I think is kind of what Alien Isolation did. But would you want a game out of this thing? And if so, what kind of game?
Yeah, man, I'd love a chance for like a high quality first or third person shooter where you could play as a Colonial Marine, if not Ripley or Hicks or something. I think that would be unbelievable. Now I had forgotten about this. Konami did make in 1990, an aliens run and gun sort of side-scrolling
in the
arcade game.
Right.
There were some rights issues with it. Like, there are xenomorphs in it. You do play as a Ripley-like character, but I think the box art or the console cabinet art was a different version of Ripley and Newt. There were some things, but that's a really good game. That's a fun game. Even if you could pick it up on emulator or for the Genesis or something, it's super fun.
Oh, did they port it to Genesis?
I think they did. I think
I
there's
vaguely
a
remember
Genesis
that game,
version
actually.
of that
Yeah,
game.
I know what you're talking
I
about.
think there is. I don't think it was for Super Nintendo though.
No, I think that's
a good one.
Alien versus Predator or something. I think was on Super Nintendo.
That might be another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they did try, but it was one of those things where they were half-assed efforts to have like a full-fledged AAA
for the era. Yeah. Well,
it'd be amazing.
I mean, they didn't show any restraint, so I don't want to say that, but for all the Sunsoft Batmans and all the really good licensed games, there's just so much trash out there. And it's not a surprise that they had IP. There were IP problems all over the place. Remember, another James Cameron movie, Terminator, had a massive IP problem with Journey to Silius, which was originally supposed to be a Terminator game.
Yes.
On the NES, and was reskinned at like the last minute to
good game.
Just a fucking awesome game. Rocking soundtrack.
Yeah, really
Sunsoft.
One of the best. That's
Good
right.
Lord,
that's a
man.
Sunsoft joint.
Oh, definitely, of course.
Yeah, good shit.
All right, Dave, let's end with this question from Rage Quit Richard, who says, "Hello, gentlemen. Who is the best character in this movie, and why is it Bill Paxton? Love to hear your thoughts on this, especially Dagan, who I know loves character actors. Thanks." So, Dag, let's leave it. Who is the takeaway character from Alien?
Bill Paxton's great. We all remember him. I really love, Sigourney Weaver, man. You can't really give anyone the crown above her just because her performance is so memorable and authentic. It's just so good. I love Michael Biehn as Hicks too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really familiar with his entire body of work, but I really like him in this. I think all the main Colonial Marines characters are actually quite good. As I said, I like Al Matthews a lot in this too. But you know who we forgot to talk about and who I think steals the show in many ways? Oh, and of course, shout out again to Paul Reiser. But I think Lance Hendrickson
definitely
as Bishop. Very strong, man. Very, very strong performance. Really
sullen.
Something he was able to kind of take Ash's story from the first Alien film and sort of subvert expectations a little bit and kind of appear like an alien, to permit, sort of put himself forward like he was going to be the villain. And his introduction with the knife in hand scene, before you even realize he's an android, by the way. He starts bleeding while they're eating, and then that's when Ripley freaks out. It's like, who the hell invited an android on this mission type thing? Don't you know what happened last time? And just the way Bishop sort of plays up this sort of, is he menacing or is he friend or foe? And the way he carries that out till the very end of the film is really, really good. So you got to kind of give him a shout too. I would put Sigourney Weaver, Hendrickson, Biehn, Reiser. I would put them all on equal footing. I think they're all a huge part of what makes the movie so memorable, just that kind of ensemble. What about you, C?
Yeah, but by the way, it's worth noting, I didn't appreciate this fully at the time, but Lance Hendrickson is in Detroit Become Human, the Quantic Dream
is that right?
PS4 game, and he plays a human, like an old man human who has a robot, like an android who helps him. And I remember people being like, oh, it's kind of an ode to his role.
Great voice.
Yeah. And I love this. Like I said, the sullen nature of his performance, I think, is awesome. It's very interesting, almost emo, like quiet. And
yes.
I dig that a lot. I like him a lot. I still have to go with Apone, though. I just think that's the best character in the movie. I love any character that just breaks the tension but feels like he belongs there is awesome. And we've said it before, there is something comical about the U.S. Marines and something comical about the American military, not in the mission and the danger, but in the way they interact with each other. And we talked about that a lot with Generation Kill, about how funny it is. It's not funny at all, but it's funny as hell, actually, when you think about it, because if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the situation they all find themselves in. And so I think he kind of encapsulates that. I like that performance from Al Matthews a lot. And
breaking the tension. You said it. Yeah, he really does. Somebody wake up Hicks. Like that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
It's
like
so good.
They're dropping and he's asleep. It's good stuff. All right. Well, that's all we have for Aliens, the 1986 film. It's available multiple places, but we both got it on Amazon Prime. You can check it out there. It's a cheap $3 or $4. Dave, let's end as we always do with a dad joke, the first of 20.
All right, my friend. I got a new one for us to break in the new year. Kyle, what did one Dorito farmer say to the other?
Oh, I don't know.
Cool ranch.
That's good. I like that one. That's a good one.
Not bad.
Confident.
Not
Came out
bad.
confident with that one. I appreciate that.
All right,
Well,
starting off on a high note.
Yeah, very well done. Good to get back into the swing of things again. Good to see you, Dave. Good to see all of you and be with all of you out there. Thank you for supporting KnockBack and all things on Last Stand. We go each and every week, as you know, and you can get each episode early and ad-free by going to Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. Couldn't do it without you over there. Remember, you can join us on Discord through Patreon. Submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. Submit topic ideas. We'll see you over there. We appreciate you. We thank you. We'll see you next time for more KnockBack. Until then, goodbye.
Game over, man.
KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.